There we go. Turn the audio on. Oh god, it doesn't matter what I do. I get a weird light everywhere I am. I guess that's a little bit better. So this is going to be chapter 10. Thought I was going to get it into yesterday, and it didn't work out. So I'm going to read that for you today, and then I probably will not be back. Maybe until Wednesday, depending on how Monday goes. Monday, my wife has an appointment with her doctor that's going to kind of potentially overlap with when the normal reading would be, and there might be some moving parts going on Monday night, so that may not happen. And Tuesday, I am actually going to be at Norway Brewing Company in Norway, Maine. So if you like good food and good beer and you're in that area, the New England area, Norway Brewing Company, 2 to 5, I think. I might be there a little longer. I'll be there selling books that I will sign for anybody who wants to buy them. I'll also sign copies if you bring a copy by you've already purchased. Happy to do that. I've done that before. And I'm open to talking to people who are there if they want to pop in. Maybe I will do a little live stream while I'm there. I kind of wanted to show Jerry and Eric from PA and the Acquisitions Intoxicated stream what the bar looked like, so I might throw that on at the end and then tweet it to them so they can check out the bar. I think they think it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's what's going on this week. But there'll be at least 2 chapters next week. So, yeah, so I'm going to start with 10. 10's not terribly long. This will probably be about 30-minute read. And then if there's people that want to ask questions, they can fire away. Hopefully everybody's having, if you're in the U.S., a good break with the 4th. And if you're a soccer fan from Europe, the continent's doing pretty well right now. So chapter 10 is going to focus essentially entirely on what is happening in the north around Edge, Raymere, and Romond, trying to essentially evade capture now that they have escaped Castle Bane and Wolfbane, and find a way further north to this place they've heard only rumors about called the Twisted Spire, which Daervaron was in communication with someone from there called Valroth, and they're working on some bizarre project. The problem is that they are definitely being pursued by Wolfbane's operatives, and one of those operatives is Saltillion, the other wizard that's working for Wolfbane, and Saltillion is also curious about what exactly Daervaron is working on with this character Valroth. So there's a couple of different balls in the air for that plotline. So, chapter 10. The Great Northern Waste is a treacherous land full of unseen ice chasms, thin frozen lakes with a frosted coating is no thicker than a sword blade, and ravenous predators that will kill anything to stay alive. The Napoleons, a nation of hardy humans renowned for their toughness and courage, call the waste home, along with the dreaded forest of Whitewood and the even more desolate lands of the Frozen Reach. Most people would look at the lands north of the God's Bones Mountains and leave them be, or remain entirely out on the thin strip abutting the northern foothills of these mountains called the Springtide Steppe, where the weather is at least seasonal. Not the Napoleons. From the very beginning, they have been explorers and settlers, carving out homes in the worst of the cold climes. The houses of Nepal formed slowly over time, with violent battles for supremacy marking most of the nation's early history. In fact, the unification of Nepal did not take place until the Age of Faith, as most of the Thanes were unwilling to swear loyalty to a singular ruler. Apart from Nepal City, a great bastion of civilization in an uncivilized territory, there are several scattered towns of significant size, formed from the efforts of people across the inhospitable landscape. Nepal City lies at the edge of the Springtide Steppe, with low winter just to the east, north of the Pillars of Light. In contrast, the towns of the Frozen Reach, which rarely see temperatures warm enough to completely thaw the lakes and streams of their land, are small and compact. Crestwind, Tianus, and Winter's Folly form a stretch of fishing towns and mines for the precious dark ice, valued by smiths and mages across Tethtanir, all of which allows the residents to narrowly eke out a living each year. The region west of the Dragonscale Mountains is almost bereft of wildlife or arable land, and only Shearwater Cove, along the western coast, houses a concentrated number of people. The lands around the Whitewood, just north of Nepal City, hold the 2 most populous towns in the nation outside the capital. Hethagar, to the east, is a hunting and logging town of considerable size, but it is Glaciar, a walled town nearly as old as Nepal City, that has played the largest part in the nation's history. Glaciar has been besieged and severely damaged several times. Upon its founding, an internal feud over mining rights had led to the formation of House Araphos, whose members were sealed beneath the dragon scales and managed to find passages west that eventually brought them above ground on the other side of the mountains. During the unification of Nepal, Glaciar was the target of Vladar Konin, the self-proclaimed High Thane of Nepal City, and the people of Glaciar had to call on the orcs of the Sundered Blades clan to overthrow the mad ruler. When the Arcane Wars led to the invasion of the Nepalian Empire, the forces of the god Sorcerer besieged Glaciar, a fight they only overcame with the aid of the entire Nepalian nation and several foreign entities. In each case, House Squall has been the ever-present force in Glaciar. It was they who had sealed the mines and trapped their foes of House Arafos within. It was Uthgar Squall who had rallied the people of the north against Vladar Konin, and it was Alfhilda Squall, at only 16, who led her people against the armies of the god Sorcerer. The first towns of Nepal taken by Wolfbane and the Nerathians had been those of the Frozen Reach. Caught unaware and unprepared, they had fallen without much of a fight. Most of the thanes who ruled those towns were permitted to keep their titles and continue their duties, but their brethren from Hethagar and Glaciar had responded by trying to fight back and free their countrymen. Algathor Squall had been the renowned and beloved thane of his house for some time before the invasion began, but had passed on his duties to his son Greymane, with the ascension of Rhaegar Holt as the new High Thane of Nepal. Under the leadership of Greymane Squall, commander of the Nepalian armies, a disastrous counterattack had been attempted in the north that resulted in the death of Thane Fernal Hethagar. Greymane then fled Glaciar and his home with his family, his wife, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. Algathor chose to stay behind and hold on to the family's longhouse out of pride and no small amount of stubbornness. The rest of the squalls reached Nepal City and its high stone walls ahead of the oncoming Nerathian army, where Greymane set to advising the young Rhaegar on the defense of his city and castle. What Algathor could not have known when he abdicated command of his house to his son was that Greymane, while a gifted military leader, had entered into agreements of questionable foresight with Hrothgar Conan. The Thane of House Conan was involved in all manner of illegal activities within the city of Nepal: prostitution, gambling, and the trafficking of slaves. Greymane agreed to look the other way as Rhaegar Holt's military advisor in exchange for Hrothgar helping to build his reputation with the people of Nepal City via his network of rumor-spreading spies and thieves. Hrothgar quickly turned his knowledge of Greymane's lax enforcement of laws to his advantage, first by blackmailing him into delaying his venture north to aid the towns of the Frozen Reach, under threat of exposing his turning a blind eye to the corruption within Nepal City. When Greymane finally did bring his army northward, Hrothgar had bought Wolfbane time to lay an ambush that decimated the Nepalian forces. The spymaster then continued to use his influence over Greymane to work his greatest deceit of all. Dearvron had by that time infiltrated the city and made himself at home in the dungeons of the castle, undetected by those living there. It was he who, under Hrothgar's guidance, went to Greymane and offered him a deal. If he would betray his people and open the gates of the city, he and his family would be spared and permitted to leave, while the illusion that Greymane had stood by the High Thane and resisted to the last would persist. The traitorous Napoleon, knowing the depleted forces of his army could not withstand a siege from the greater force of Wolfbane, agreed. One night he surreptitiously opened the eastern gate of the city and watched, ashamed, from the battlements of the castle, as the enemy took his home street by street. When the invaders strode triumphantly into the hall of Nepal City Castle, Greymane was there beside the young Rhaegar Holt, advising him to surrender for the sake of his people and himself. But Rhaegar, though young and inexperienced, was also proud and valiant. He would not kneel to Wolfbane or his army, preferring death instead. Admittedly impressed by the younger man's bravery, Wolfbane had him thrown in prison beneath his own castle. What has become of Rhaegar since his imprisonment is unknown. But for Greymane, the outcome was far worse. When he took Rhaegar's place as the authority surrendering the city and empire to the Nerathians, Wolfbane revealed that Hrothgar had been working for him all along. He called Greymane the worst kind of traitor, one who would turn his back on his duty for personal pride and survival, rather than belief in some greater good. Wolfbane ordered Greymane and his entire family arrested, but the Thane's sons, squalls through and through, fought back and were killed. His eldest daughter tried to flee and was captured and reportedly raped by several of Hrothgar's men before dying in the dungeons with her mother and sister. Greymane was imprisoned near them, and he heard his own family curse his name as his wife, her heart broken, died shortly after his daughter. When he managed to orchestrate his escape from his cell, Greymane went looking for his lone surviving daughter, but the chamber where she had been held was empty. The former Thane of House Squall fled the castle and city, and no one knows what became of him. What Greymane had not known was that his daughter, Rhaemyr, had survived. Dearvron had taken a personal interest in managing the prisoners in the dungeons of the castle, and he had sensed her emerging potency in the arcane. Hoping to turn her into a loyal and useful servant, he was rebuffed by her staunch adherence to the Napoleon nation and her, now greatly reduced, family. Greymane had fled, leaving his name to his only remaining daughter, and Rhaemyr had proudly done her best to uphold her ancestry. Even as it became apparent to Dearvron that she would never serve him, frustration her continued survival brought to Caermon Arafos pleased him to no end. Rhaemyr was allowed to remain in the library of Nepal City Castle, where the Dark Wizard watched Saltillion's futile attempts to woo her fail miserably. For over a year, Rhaemyr had to stand by as her people were exploited, enslaved, and sometimes killed for the slightest violation of the new draconian laws of Wolfbane's regime. Valissa Ulfrin, once a servant of the Napoleon Empire herself, sided with the harsh treatment of the people, openly decrying the weak rulers who had let her family of Ulfrin and the town of Tiannis fall without resistance to the invaders. Raymer became angrier and angrier, though she directed her fury not at the invaders, but at her father, whom she deemed responsible for these atrocities. Raymer suspected that her father had managed to escape the city and flee to an easier life elsewhere, spared the shame of his sins and the righteous anger of the people he had abandoned. As far as she was concerned, he was dead and gone. Meeting Edge while working in the library was the first time in that hard year she caught a glimmer of hope. He'd been standing in the main room, which was well kept and dust-free unlike the stacks around it. He held an ancient leather-bound volume in one hand and leafed through the pages with the other. Once he found what he wanted, he smiled contentedly and settled into one of the room's overstuffed armchairs to read. Raymer watched him with only cursory interest, but made it a point to check what volume he had selected from the shelf, since she expected he would simply abandon the book when he was done for her to find and replace. The location of the chosen tome surprised her, and she observed him further. Given his appearance, Raymer thought the text would be military strategies or accounts of great campaigns. She was surprised to see it was instead a history of Teth-Tinir, legends and myths. It happened to be one of her own favorites. She was drawn toward Edge before realizing she had exposed herself, and when he gestured her over, she was too frightened not to obey. But rather than question why she was staring at Wolfbane's favored commander, he instead asked, "Have you read this?" Taken aback, Raymer hurriedly replied, "Yes, my lord." Setting the book down, Edge turned to her, and his powerful green eyes stunned Raymer from the first moment they met her own. Entirely green eyes. "I am no lord, my lady. Just call me Edge." His smile was genuine. "Raymer," she extended her hand. "Delighted," he answered, taking it gently. "Now, I would like to know, what do you think of this book?" There followed that afternoon and well into the evening a long discussion of the massive volume of fact and potential fiction on the history of their world. It was apparent, perhaps in those first few moments, that love had blossomed between them. From then on, Raymer became happier and more optimistic once again. Edge would visit her late at night, sometimes happy, often depressed. He told her all about life with Wolfbane before he had accepted this dread task of conquest and domination, how he and his slighter twin brother, Eadwulf, had followed the great warrior, learning his trade, mastering their own weapons. Eadwulf had been left behind in Atlantis as the invasion was planned, and where Edge had seen changes for ill in their master, his brother had seen ambition well placed. Eadwulf's task had been to rally the people in Westia to Narath's cause, and since leaving him, Edge had received no word of his twin. Raymer comforted and consoled him, and together they hatched a plan for escape. The addition of Romund had been an unexpected turn of fortune. Following the harrowing flight from Nepal City, the three fugitives had left the caverns and headed north towards the traditional squall seat of Glaciar, in search of provisions and a map to find the possible location of the Twisted Spire. Glaciar would be a few days north and west of Nepal City through the thinnest stretch of the Whitewood, and the least imposing section of the Great Northern Waste. But even given the mildness of the region, the going was surprisingly easy for the Northland. Still in the southerly region of the Waste, the party was not subjected to as much danger as they would be further north. Edge was glad that Raymer would not be around for that leg of the journey. Despite his age, Romund was a rugged traveler carrying an equal amount of the supplies and pushing the pace rather than holding it back. Several times they had to hide on the roadside to avoid armed patrols of Narathians, fearing one of them might recognize Edge, even as he tried to hide his face and garb. Raymer became more and more upset upon seeing soldiers she had known under her father's command in Narathian livery. Edge tried to comfort her, but to no avail. Her fury remained white-hot in her eyes. Even with the occasional patrols, the small group arrived at Glaciar without event or injury. The town with its low stone walls still showed the ravages of its initial capture a year before, though the burnt stone and broken buildings could have come from any number of previous staunch stands of resistance to would-be conquerors. The Narathians had repaired none of the damage they had incurred, and the townspeople were too few and stretched too thin to spend time cleaning up their broken lives. Getting inside proved slightly more difficult than expected, as they could not enter the main gate where the guards accosted and searched every incoming traveler, taking his or her select goods and money as an army tax. Aside from that, there was the issue of whether they were being pursued by their foes. Edge had an easily recognized face, and they had heard from passing patrols enough to know that he was to be captured on sight and killed if absolutely necessary. Romund finally solved the problem when he found a jagged hole low in one of the walls and wide enough for them to crawl through. Edge went first, shoving his halberd in front of him. Raymer and Romund followed quickly, and they took stock of their surroundings within the town. There were signs of destruction everywhere in the alley they had entered. What had once been a shop of some sort was broken on three sides. Only the wall that had once held its business sign still stood. Other buildings across the street had holes in the roofs and walls, and all were deserted. Romund was mesmerized. Where are all the people? Edge hefted his weapon. They're dead or in hiding. Wolfbane ordered any resistance was to be met with no quarter. Romund shook his head in sadness, saying softly, "Such hatred. Where does man harbor these vicious intents?" Raymer walked forward determinedly, deep inside, but apparently not deep enough. The main road the alley led into was little better. A few structures still stood and were apparently serviceable, but the people were haggard and weary. To Roman they seemed little more than listless bodies, just moving corpses, mechanically going through old routines. The soldiery took what they wanted from the few food stalls along the roadside, paying for nothing, and the vendors had seemingly learned not to complain. Edge led the small group along the broken buildings and into another alley before the guards could notice them. "We can't hide in the crowd, seeing as there is none," he remarked. "Raymir, where does your grandfather live?" The young woman thought a moment, then pointed. "It's not far from here. Can you get us there quietly?" She nodded again, and the three took off swiftly through back alleys, heading toward the rear of the town. Glacier was built against the mountainside of a small peak of the same name, nestled in the lowest mountains of the Dragon Scales that loomed large like a heavy backdrop on the settlement. Against the nearest rocky rise sat the Squall estate, a small run-down manor in the style of the long houses of old, in which Raymir had grown up. Now only her grandfather remained with his servants, Renatus and Anhagar. When the trio reached the gate, Raymir feared it was locked and that her grandfather had gone, or worse, died, but when she touched the frosted iron bars she found they swung open easily. Slowly she entered the courtyard of the manor's garden. The bushes, evergreens really, had withered and died despite their resistance to the cold. The entire snow-covered entry had the feel of a graveyard rather than a home. The three crunched tensely up to the big oaken doors. Taking a deep breath, Raymir grasped the heavy door knock, hanging with from the house symbol of a jagged mountain, and thumped it 3 times slowly. They stood waiting, Raymir remarking, "Renatus should have been here before I finished. He was always quick to answer the door." Roman did his best to console her. "Perhaps he and your grandfather are at their afternoon tea, child." They waited a few minutes longer, and just as Raymir was about to knock at the door again, it opened a crack. Then it flew wide as an elderly man, clad in light leather armor and with a short sword at his side, pulled it inward with a gasp. "Raymir! My gods, I thought you were dead." The young woman lunged forward, embracing him fiercely. "Grandfather!" Edge eyed the manor entrance. Several guards seemed to be investigating the exchange at the Squall's front door. "Thane Squall, would you mind if we came inside?" The old man eyed the soldiers at his gate and nodded grimly, saying, "Come in, please, to the study with you. Raymir, show your friends the way while I bar the door." The weary travelers followed Raymir into the small study, while Algathor Squall, last of the male Squall line, watched the Nerathian soldiers turn and march back to the town gate before barring the door to his home. Saltillion did not wait for the guards to report what he already knew, through rumor, that the traitor and his accomplices had indeed entered the Squall manor. This would please the guard's captain, who had been looking for an excuse to evict Algathor Squall since he took command of the town's defenses. Saltillion could care less about the old man. He wanted his granddaughter back and her green-eyed lover captured or dead. The third man spotted traveling with them he knew nothing of, but seeing as he had aided in their escape, he too could die when Saltillion caught them. The wizard had been driven to great anger at learning they had managed to reach Glacier unnoticed, and had rushed swiftly from just outside Nepal City to reach the town before the three moved on. How they had evaded his patrols he did not know. Once it became apparent they had escaped through a collapsed tunnel in Raymir's cottage within Castle Bane, Saltillion had felt certain they would be heading back to Glacier, her ancestral home. The only road from Nepal City had been thick with the mage's patrols, told to stop any and all travelers looking for a red-haired woman and former Lieutenant Edgewolf Elvak. The plan had failed, yet he did not like admitting he had been outsmarted. Still, they had not been clever enough to see the wisdom in avoiding the Squall home. He had known where they were heading, and it had been simple enough to allow them to sneak into Glacier. Once there, they would be cornered, with no passage out except by the front door, where he would be waiting with the soldiers of the Nerathian army. If necessary, he would force his way inside, take Raymir, and burn the manor to the ground. A simple plan, but he consoled himself with the wisdom that the best plans are often the least complicated. He sat in the dining room set aside for him at the inn closest to the Squall estate. He had ordered the entire building cleared so he could set up shop where he liked, though in truth he had issued the command more to demonstrate his authority than out of need. The occupying forces captain came in after a sharp knock and Saltillion's stammering permission to enter. "My lord," the captain saluted, "they are indeed the ones you seek." "Excellent, captain," Saltillion told him. "Take your soldiers to the courtyard and wait for my signal." The captain saluted again. "Yes, sir." Saltillion smiled as the guard left to muster his troops and joined the way in which he swiftly followed his orders. The haggard mage took his moment of solitude to reach into the large satchel he always carried and pull forth a strange volume. It was small, not thick or built like to the normal proportions of a magical text or history book. It looked, from a distance, more like a personal journal or carefully crafted notebook. Upon closer inspection, it was quite obviously something very different. It had a leathery coating dyed in a deep purple, and with a deeply pressed silver symbol on the cover in the shape of a swirling vortex. Saltillion could have easily slipped it into his robe or boots had he wanted to conceal it, but as he was alone, he held it before him and grinned with a satisfaction and pleasure that would have been unnerving to any observer. Gently, reverently, he set the book on the table in front of him. He caressed the surface, too smooth and delicate to have been the skin of any beast, and felt the undulations of the swirling symbol as his fingers skimmed it. This had been his great accomplishment, the uncovering of a book that d'Arveron had overlooked in the mass of texts in Castlebane's libraries. Saltillion suspected its small size had made him pass it swiftly and without notice, but he himself had felt compelled to pick it up and open it. The text within was written in a strikingly choppy hand and was difficult to read, both due to the strange lettering and the fact that it was an odd mix of the common language, the arcane script of the gods, and other writing he did not recognize. Oh, but the delicious wonders it contained. The book was a fit of ramblings and incoherencies, but where he had been able to understand anything, the shock of that clarity had been like a bonfire suddenly alighting in the deepest darkness. Saltillion had been trained, like all wizards of Teth Tanir, to believe that there were 6 distinct fields of magical study: ruination, disruption, natural, conjuring, regeneration, and degeneration. But this wondrous item implied another kind of eldritch magic, one far older and greater than that of the established schools of study that now seemed trivial in their organization and narrow in the scope of their power. This text was something else, something greater, and the longer Saltillion had possessed it, the more compelled he felt to read it, to caress it, to simply assure its presence was ever near. With this book he had felt the need for sleep and sustenance recede, for its might was such that it alone could give him life, and he knew that soon he would pull from it the secrets it contained, and use them to seize the future he felt was meant for him. To the south in Nepal City, d'Arveron, returned from his deliberately brief excursion to the east, was doing some plotting of his own. The undead wizard had made his trip to Marlpaz, as promised to Wolfbane, and come back in secret. He knew he could have argued against his exile, and won, but it was easier to simply avoid the debate altogether. Besides, his visit had the good fortune of aligning with a foolhardy attempt to sack the fortress by the Angledaics, and much of d'Arveron's frustration had been taken out in the destruction of a great many in the assaulting force. The mage also understood that Wolfbane was an important component in the larger scheme of d'Arveron's master Narath, and until Edgewolf Elvok was dead or returned to the fortress where d'Arveron could silence or frame him as a traitor in front of the commander, the invoker needed to demonstrate loyalty to him. Otherwise, their relationship would become too contentious and cause unnecessary delays, which would be unacceptable. d'Arveron had to return to Nepal City and his dungeons anyway, for he needed to report on his progress to Narath. In the dread chamber beneath his laboratory, he met once again with the Lord of Death. The Nightcloaks have not caught up with them yet. d'Arveron crossed his arms. My lord, a small number of them are keeping a reasonable distance from the target, but will prevent them from turning back west. As you ordered, I am driving them eastward and into the path of the broken army. Good. Narath paused a moment before continuing. There's a road south from the town of Delmore that leads to a great underground passage. Should the Broken fail to destroy this group, have the Nightcloaks kill them on the road to the caves, or force them within. I have contingencies in place there, if you should fail me. d'Arveron bristled at the insinuation of his incompetence, but held his tongue. Then he asked, May I know, God of Death, what other entity is aiding you in this matter? Perhaps I could more effectively coordinate this endeavor with greater understanding of all the plans in place. You know all that you need to. Slay them before they reach the passage, and it will not matter who else was acting on my orders. Though frustrated, d'Arveron chose to let the issue go. Your Nightcloak commander is ready to depart once more, and reinforce the others to the south. Then make it so, d'Arveron. I will reward you well when you are successful, but this venture must not fail, or I shall be greatly displeased. The image of Narath vanished with his ominous words hanging in the air. d'Arveron shrugged off his thoughts of precisely what would happen if he did fail, confident that this would not be the case. Striding assuredly from the summoning room, he mounted the stairs to his laboratory and marched down an unlit tunnel that stretched far beyond the reaches of the city. A long walk of nearly 2 hours down the cold and dripping halls eventually gave way to biting cold and bright moonlight as d'Arveron came out of the tunnel just south of the city walls, pushing open an immense sewer grate as he stepped onto the cold earth of an aging graveyard. In the pale moonlight, a multitude of black-mounted shapes sat astride dark horses. The largest of the group moved his mount slowly toward d'Arveron. What is your command, master? d'Arveron eyed the hissing figure. These riders, perhaps a kind of undead like himself, were the most terrifying and unnatural forces he had leave to command. The Nightcloaks, they called themselves, and they served d'Arveron at the order of the god of death himself. Even Wolfbane did not know about them. These strange beings remained wrapped in long black cloth most of the time, but d'Arveron had seen underneath the folds. They were pale white and sometimes appeared to glow in the light of the moon. He knew the rumors, few and lacking much detail, of their origins, and some evidence supported those tales, but where they had come from mattered not to him. The Nightcloaks had served Narath in secret and with a fierce loyalty that was unwavering, and were far more powerful than nearly any mortal being on Teth Tanir. Their first venture south had gone poorly, which was a great surprise, for they claimed to have encountered a wizard that had killed one of their kind, and a weapon that was a danger even to them. It was something d'Arveron had not expected, and been curious to know more about. It had not been fear or sadness in the eyes of the leader when he told d'Arveron about the death of one of their number, but cold anger, and a hint of an insatiable need to seek vengeance. It is said the dead know no fear. but they are unused to any challenge, and their response to one is most unpleasant. Take all of your company, ride south, do not stop. Find the god of death's enemies, and keep them heading toward Delmore. The army will smash them there if they linger, but if they continue onward, ensure they go south. Kill them, especially the one you sought in Guayaquil if you can, but should you fail, keep them moving southward. Once they enter the tunnels, others are in place to do what our Lord commands. As you say. With an unearthly cry, the mounted horrors turned and raced from the graveyard, following the black steed of their leader. D'Everron watched them go, his robe flowing in the sharp, cutting wind of the night. When Valroth had sufficiently prepared his work in the frozen reach, there would be no stopping the Nerathians. They had too many forces of strange origin and mighty ability serving them. Once the enemies of Neroth were dead, D'Everron could return to looking out only for himself and his interests. The thought was comforting, and had he been capable of it, D'Everron would have smiled then. Instead, now consoled, the Dark Mage re-entered his passage and returned to the laboratory. The tiny village of Florin had burned like a dead twig. No sooner had the broken army reached the wall-less hamlet than it was little more than smoke on the wind. The few who had survived fled south to warn those who were next in the path of the relentless army. The commanders from Castle Bane sat on a hill above the burning houses and farms, listening to the screams of the dead and dying. Valissa, mounted on her war-horse, watched the orgy of slaughter with a practiced look of indifference. Hrothgar, who stood next to her holding the reins of his own mount, was more disgusted than uncaring. They're like animals. You can't fight a war with such rabble. They hardly know which end of the spear to stab with. Valissa smiled. Hrothgar, the Napoleon's poor and simple high thane. The last words were spoken with obvious derision. What did you expect? These people have fought for years as a disorganized mass of rage. Most have no military training, and those who once did have long forgotten it. They only know how to kill the defenseless and the outnumbered. Hrothgar grimaced. Then why are we not here with our own soldiers? We could take the whole of Lagotia without involving this useless lot. Valissa turned to the assassin leader with a look of annoyance. Because our soldiers number a little over 10,000, and even the massed army in Nepal is not much better trained than this one. Also, we're scattered, soldiers in marl paths, all across the damned unending winter of our homeland. We do not have time to join our forces and make a concentrated move south. This rabble, as you call them, is our best hope. Hrothgar grunted. The armies of the Order of the Blade and the Fortress of Aves are the best trained in the continent, barring Yongodeus. Numbers or no numbers, this lot do not have the skill to match them. Valissa was getting tired of Hrothgar's attitude. We have over 15,000 broken, which is not including close to 400 gnolls. They account for more than enough Eagle Knights to crush them alone. We're going to burn, rape, and maim every person from the east inward until that castle is all that stands in our way. This is not an army, it's a force of vengeful nature. The divided and self-absorbed semi-nations of Dragon's Watch will crumble in days. The assassin was about to respond when the broken chieftain, Goraneth Megrim, appeared, cleaning off his bloody dagger and sheathing his hefty, curved cutlass. The broken leader was a vicious-looking man. Scars crisscrossed his face, and he wore a black head-rag with a patch covering his missing left eye. The patch prevented one from seeing the undoubtedly horrific wound beneath it, but did not do enough to conceal the puckered white scar running from above his forehead to well below his left jaw. He wore red breeches that might once have been bright and proud, but were now stained with blood and grime to a dark, foreboding color. Over them, he had black leather boots, clearly made for long marches, coupled with a worn red tunic, similar to the breeches, and torn leather armor of the same dark black tone. Goraneth was a vicious, ruthless, and impassive commander of men. Once he had been an officer in the army of the Lion, and unlike those who had first tried to return to Westia by boat, he had chosen to stay in Lagotia and carve out a bloody empire for himself and his wandering tribe of cutthroats in the Dust Plains. Without his allegiance, the invaders would have been hard-pressed to gain the Broken's help. Caermon Erephos had brokered the deal with Goraneth, being a man of rather sadistic hobbies himself, but Hrothgar was not as impressed as his fellow Thane. Still, he had to admit Goraneth and many of his men were a fearsome sight in their bloody, ragged dress and hodgepodge of fearsome and sometimes improvised weaponry. Goraneth halted a few paces from the two and spoke in his gruff baritone. We burned the village to the ground. All the people are dead. We're ready to move south. Hrothgar sighed. None escaped this time? Goraneth eyed him darkly. My men want plunder more than blood. I cannot always kill those smart enough to flee quickly. Hrothgar took a lecturing tone. You should plan your attack better then, barbarian. If you knew anything of military strategy, we might not. Goraneth interrupted him. My men are winning these wars, not you. Keep your tongue between your teeth, or I'll cut it out. The broken commander turned smartly and marched back to his raging horde of killers, leaving the Napoleon spymaster sputtering with rage and some degree of fear. Regaining himself, Hrothgar turned on a sniggering Valissa. Well, he'll certainly have alerted Delmore with this charade. Laugh if you want, Valissa, but Delmore is a town, not a village. It may not have gates and guardhouses, but it has a wall of solid wooden logs to bar intruders. With enough preparation, they could hold that small town for a time, especially if they know we're coming. We could lose many men that we need later, in real battles. Melissa's mood sobered up somewhat, but she remained confident. So some of the broken die. What of it? We have more men than leaves in an autumn wind. They aren't our own, and if they fall, so be it. There will still be enough left to take the fortress of Aves, and everything in between. Hrothgar was still unconvinced. It's foolish. You do not waste soldiers if you don't have to. Melissa was fed up with him at last. Go play with your knives, Hrothgar, and let me worry about the soldiering. You kill individuals. I kill armies. So you will defer to me, understood? Without answering, Hrothgar turned and rode back to his waiting men, and gathered them to return to the camp. He had preferred the Valissa at Castle Bane that went round dressed provocatively and used her body and sweet tongue to manipulate others, not this new woman who had come dressed in practical plate and leather armor, and with a general's keen mind. He felt her undermining his authority at every turn, and he had not manipulated matters to become the High Thane of Nepal, only to lose his position to some woman. His men gathered around him, dressed in the dark blue and red of House Conan, and bearing forth his banner, a three-bladed dagger. Each blade represented one component of the Conan's triumvirate of power: knowledge, coercion, and force. Hrothgar contemplated which of his ancestral methods would be best for dealing with the upstart from House Ulfrin. Melissa watched Hrothgar leave with little interest, but thought briefly of how far she ought to push him before starting to worry about her own safety. She knew the materialistic and soft Hrothgar would spend some time taking down his tent and packing his collection of clothes, exotic foods, and other luxuries before heading south behind the main body of the army. Melissa had respected Hrothgar, to a degree, before leaving for the lands south of the God's Bones Mountains, but now she utterly detested him. The man worried too much, and his posturing infuriated her, but his archers would be essential to defeating the Eagle Knights at Aves. For now, she would need to be somewhat more respectful, at least until this miserable campaign was over with. Alright, so that is Chapter 10. Like I said, I'll probably do Chapter 11 sometime next week, but it might not be Monday because of all the sort of balls in the air for Monday. Oh, hi, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to pronounce that. News, Nyouz 71. Hi, thanks for stopping in. If you're looking for the previous videos, I think most of them are still up here on Twitch, but they are also available on the YouTube channel, which is the same username you find for the Twitch channel. It's just VultureX21. And there should be a playlist that's the Legacy Chronicle, and that is the Sword, currently chapters 1 through 8. I'll upload 9 and 10 today, and they should be there tonight. Additionally, you can get the book on Amazon. If you search T.H. Paul Legacy Chronicle, it should pop up. It is organized as a series by Amazon, so it's easy enough to get there. It's both Kindle and paperback, and you can follow me on Twitter at Legacy Chronicle if you would like to. There is one other option that I keep forgetting to mention on the streams, which is I do mail out copies of books that I've signed. If you want to pay me directly for them, you can get in touch via Twitch. You can email me at trevorhpaul@gmail.com, or you can send a message. There's a Facebook page for the Legacy Chronicle too. If you want to do that, I do electronic payments through a couple of different platforms. I'm sure I can work something out to help you out. If you are enjoying these streams, these videos, please follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch, and that helps out quite a bit because the more subscribers I get, the closer we get to being over the 50 mark, and then might get a little bit of revenue through the stream itself. So thanks for everybody who stopped in. Unless somebody pops out with a question before I go, that's going to be it tonight. Right around 39 minutes, so about where I thought it would be. And we'll do Chapter 10 next week. So hopefully you're somebody who's enjoying the World Cup, because it's been crazy, and today was great. It's unfortunate we got to wait till Monday for the next game, but that's what happens. So I don't see any immediate questions in the chat. Thanks to everybody who stopped in, and I will catch anyone listening next week. Have a good one.